Well, this is going to be fun. What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Eternals is no perfect movie for the hundredth time because people are either agreeing with the critics on this or they're getting extremely defensive and looking for excuses that not sure they really qualify. But speaking on the movie, it takes place immediately after Avengers Endgame, and the Eternals are an alien race that have been living on Earth for thousands of years to protect humans from the Deviants. These aliens that look like the Zool dogs, and if they kill an Eternal, are capable of growing intelligence, consciousness, and providing an extreme danger to the Earth. That's only elevated by the fact that the Celestials, the Eternals' governing body or something like that, have decided that they consider Earth a problem with their idea of expanding the universe and have been growing a celestial inside of Earth the entire time. So, in order to prevent the planet that they've lived on and loved for thousands of years, the Eternals, one by one, start to regroup as a team to look for possible ways to prevent this birth from happening. Now, I went into this movie about a half hour after sitting through The French Dispatch, another movie that contains an abundance of characters, themes, expository monologues, and filmmaking styles. And French Dispatch, in a shorter amount of time, managed to be more focused, character driven, and entertaining than a 2.5 hour, $200 million blockbuster from a studio that has evolved constantly for 10 years. But if I'm being completely honest, after Guardians 3, 4, or 4 Love and Thunder, I love it. I would love it if people kept calling it 4, or Blade if it's R rated. If it's not, I'm completely done. I can't imagine myself sitting through any more Marvel properties because it really does feel like they're trying to reinvent themselves at the very moment they've run out of steam. I was extremely looking forward to seeing Chloé Zhao go from art house to big budget action just after seeing Nomadland alone, because admittedly, that is my only frame of reference for her as a filmmaker. I was hoping that we would still get that polished, epic large scale visual storytelling technique that she's done for years and Denis Villeneuve has brought to the table just recently to show that audiences can get into unconventional, more artsy entertainment, especially for popcorn flicks like the MCU. And even though you can get glimpses of her signature by the amount of beautiful, ultra wide landscape shots where superheroes are tiny ants in comparison to the new environment that they live in, that's elevated by the fact that this might actually be Marvel's most practical movie in terms of sets and locations. Rarely, if ever, did I feel like they were standing in front of a green screen, and that actually did make a huge difference. And even though there are 1 to 2 moments in the opening and final battle where the visual structure of the cinematography and the actors' blank, emotionless expressions, which I'll get into later, move the story forward without dialogue, I wasn't convinced that Zhao had that much control over the movie and the script in particular for a couple of different reasons. For one, this could be a typo just because the movie's been delayed for a year or so, but in the end credits, it actually says written by Chloé Zhao and Chloé Zhao, and then goes to the other two writers. So instantly they couldn't even get that right. And it makes me wonder a couple things other than that. But the second is, in regards to the script, the majority of dialogue consists of nothing but exposition dumps about how characters feel towards their team members or other factions of humanity, their philosophies on what it means to be human compared to their own existence. What does their existence even mean anymore when they find out that the Celestials have lied their asses off to them for millennial, or all of these pathetic excuses for why they keep claiming that they refuse to interfere with human disputes and catastrophes, even though they have been providing war support and advanced technology from the very beginning. Hell, for the first 1,000 years or so, they're out in the open. They're not hiding anything, and they're accepted into these communities and bonding with them, serving some of the most emotionally resonant aspects of the film that shape the very few things we actually know about these characters, and more exposition dumps about what happens in between the flashbacks and the present day that they didn't bother showing us. All of these expository monologues have two things in common. They're either things that we, as an audience, are just finding out for the first time at the last minute when it would have been more helpful for us to have seen those moments before for us to care, or they're things that we just saw in our very own eyes, and then once they relay it to the other team members off screen, the other team members just sit there and go, so what you're saying is, and then they repeat the exact same thing that we just saw. Of course that's what they're saying. Why does Marvel think that we're that fucking stupid to the point where once a flashback is over and they transition back to the present day, they have to put up a title card that says the present day? No shit, it's the present. The point is, Zhao wouldn't do this. She trusts us to put the puzzle pieces together to show, don't tell. I'm not convinced after seeing this movie that she had any control over the final cut. I could be wrong, and it could be her trying something new and not completely working out, kind of like what Ava DuVernay did with A Wrinkle in Time, but it was just a sloppy and lazy mess in regards to the writing and the storytelling, and I wouldn't have minded so much if Zhao could craft an entertaining action scene, which is something I was excited but also nervous to see from her. And this could just be a first try, but I don't think she's that capable of an action director. She does try her absolute best. There's no shaky cam, the editing isn't as choppy as it normally is, but half the fight scenes take place in the dark where you can't see who's fighting who's getting attacked by a deviant, and even when you can, the camera is so far away from the choreography that you can't really get all that excited, and the choreography and kills are pretty basic. There are a shit ton of things that we've already seen 1,000 times, and there really isn't even that much action throughout the movie. There are a lot more philosophical conversations that are trying to be in the vein of Christopher Nolan or Zack Snyder in the DCEU, and I give them full credit for being more dramatic than humorous, even though they do sell out once in a while for conventional Marvel humor that probably landed one or two jokes over the course of 2.5 hours for me, and that's not a good thing in the slightest. But they don't even really take that many advantages with the characters and what their abilities can be in combat. I'm not entirely sure why Kumail Nanjiani buffed himself up in order to shoot blasts from his fingers. He doesn't need muscles for that. He does need muscles to participate in the climactic final battle, but guess what? He doesn't actually show up in the climactic final battle, which is an incredibly dick move from a character perspective. Wouldn't you agree? It wouldn't have mattered if they had a valid excuse for why, but I didn't buy that excuse for a second, which, reminds me, when it comes down to the performances and the way they try to elevate the material, you got a terrific cast of actors who try their best with what they're given, but they're barely given any screen time, which in turn gives them barely any character development. And this is one of the few cases where I can barely describe who a character is and how good a performance was. It's insane. For starters, Salma Hayek, Lauren Ridloff, Kit Harington, Don Lee, and surprisingly even Angelina Jolie could have been rewritten out of this film, and it wouldn't have impacted the plot in the slightest. If anything, it would have been tighter, condensed, and more focused. Salma Hayek, especially, as the leader, she allegedly almost turned this movie down because she didn't want to be the supportive grandma figure, but then changed her mind when she's the wise and supreme mentor for all these Eternals. But guess what? She plays the supportive grandma figure, and a pretty crappy one at that, because when she has to defend herself from the Deviants without her other inferior Eternal warriors, she actually sucks at it. And I'm not 100% sure why. She has to reach for a gun that is randomly sitting in this one place where you would not associate having a shotgun just laying around there for. That was just fucking weird. And even with characters that I legitimately liked, because I did enjoy Lia McHugh as Sprite, I struggle to figure out why the Celestials would create a Eternal that looks 12 years old in... How do I describe this? Why is she a 12-year-old... Why is she in a 12-year-old body? It makes absolutely zero sense. But at the exact same time, I did enjoy seeing moments of her trying to establish an adult life, because without spoiling anything, she can actually create illusions with her own power. So she can actually disguise herself as a 22-year-old woman and try to go drinking, try to have a romantic relationship with somebody. But when somebody discovers her powers later on, she has to abandon it immediately, and all she can do is stare at her fellow friends and comrades who look and act like adults and be jealous of them and wish that she could have the exact same pleasures. And I instantly connected with that, even when they throw in this random love triangle moment between her, Gemma Chan, and Richard Madden, which came out of nowhere, but at the same time, I like the idea that they were going with. In regards to Angelina Jolie, Barry Keoghan, and Brian Tyree Henry's character arcs, they had so much potential with the amount of themes that were being brought to the table. Brian Tyree Henry is the inventor of the group, and he wants to provide advanced technology towards humanity, but when he does, some of it gets used for the sake of war and destruction, and it devastates him to the point where he wants to completely abandon humanity. Great stuff. Barry Keoghan is basically has mind control powers, and whenever he sees a ridiculous war or dispute, he wants to instantly use his powers to peacefully resolve it. But there's the question of, are they resolving it because they want to or because they're being forced to? And is your role as this god figure taking away their free will? Great ideas. And Angelina Jolie has these random bursts of PTSD that weren't really explored all that much, and the resolution that they come up with is a very violent one and one that I wouldn't recommend, but this is a fictional movie, and even though she's technically sleepwalking it, she does do the best that she can. I did like her fight choreography. She has the ability to create a weapon out of any energy source, and that was a neat enough power. It was one of the few powers that actually made sense through and through. And out of all the romantic relationships in this movie, because there are a shit ton, and some that you can't keep track, as I just mentioned, probably Barry Keoghan and Lauren Ridloff had the best amount of chemistry, because it felt like they had known each other for more than a few days. But so many characters are jumbled and uneven with their screen time when it's just them alone on screen, let alone as a team. I couldn't buy the chemistry that they had as a team, which is kind of important. In fact, they have more camaraderie and depth during the flashbacks that rush through thousands of years of time on Earth when they're out in the open, bonding with communities and establishing peace on Earth, that just had me sitting there thinking one thing. Why didn't this entire movie just take place in the past? Why couldn't it be a large-scale epic period piece? Because really, what Marvel movie has entirely taken place in the past? That alone would have been a change of pace for them. You could have had them slowly drifting apart over philosophical differences over the course of thousands of years while still saving the day and saving the planet, and then having the second movie, because honestly, this would have gotten a sequel regardless of what's going on in the real world, about them reuniting to save the world from a celestial coming out of Earth. I know that it would be ripping off Civil War and Endgame, but with all the much more mature and adult themes that they're trying to tackle and the darker tone in comparison, it still would have been a breath of fresh air, and it could have been an equally impactful film. But no, we spend the most consistent amount of time on 2 or 3 Eternals, and weirdly enough, they're the actors who give the most lifeless and boring performances. Richard Madden's facial expression is so brooding and lifeless that it was hard to care about him whenever he was in danger or had conflicting ideals with the other Eternals, because he is kind of the anti-hero of the group. And even when you can understand where he's coming from, his performance is so dead on arrival that it just didn't work. Same with Gemma Chan as the kind of sort of protagonist. She had absolutely no charisma whatsoever. She also had only 1 or 2 facial expressions, even when she's crying her eyes out, trying to really tug at the heartstrings. What it was that got Richard Madden and Gemma Chan in love with each other in the first place, to the point where we almost get our first Marvel sex scene because they're both shirtless on a beach. Either that, or because her name is Cersei and Richard Madden is in a romantic triangle with Cersei and Kit Harington. That's my best guess as to why they're in love with each other, because I bought the relationship between Gemma Chan and Kit Harington significantly more, and he's only in it for 5 minutes, literally to set up someone else's movie. Not his, but someone else's. This is unbelievably pathetic. And Kumail Nanjiani as the comic relief didn't work whatsoever. He never landed a joke based on how desperate the material was. I give him credit that his comedic sidekick was actually more dramatic than funny and actually had some words of wisdom as a mentor figure. That part was nice. And Nanjiani is capable of dramatic work, in case you haven't seen The Big Sick. So it's not like this is out of the ordinary for him. And his mentor relationship with Sprite actually did have a couple sweet, heartwarming moments, but he's done dramatic work before significantly better with his own material. And his disguise as this dynasty of Bollywood actors is a great idea, but they don't expand upon it. Surprise, surprise. Now, before I wrap up, there is something else that I want to talk about. People, mainly the cast and crew of the film, as well as some reporters covering it, have talked a lot about how the diversity of the cast, crew, and characters is a core strength of the film and a core defense against the people who are criticizing it. Nanjiani seemed to think that they were pissing off the right people, which, if you're trying to settle a dispute and it would be great to make peace with your enemies, I'm not sure that trying to piss them off is that good of an idea. And it's become easier to use the diversity angle as a defense, seeing as how 5 countries have banned this movie and 4 others have censored it just because 2 men are raising a child and rub their faces against each other out of love. Yeah, that's fucking pathetic. And that's not even the most risque thing in the movie, as I just pointed out. Hell, the majority of straight relationships are just them rubbing their noses and faces against each other. Like, seriously, this did not need to get banned or censored. This is fucking stupid. But regardless, 2 things to keep in mind. 1, a diverse cast and crew and characters are a good thing, but it does not instantly make your movie good. And it pisses me off how many people have gotten so ignorant of this fact that whenever they say diversity doesn't make something instantly good, the excuse is, oh, well, you're racist, sexist, ableist. No, that's not how it works. You do realize there are members of these demographics you're trying to please who know good and hell well that as great as it is that you're giving less fortunate people more jobs, it doesn't instantly make the work any good. The movie still has to be good, and the actors still have to be good in it, which brings me to the second point. Having seen it, I can't see why LGBTQ or deaf communities would even praise the way that they portray these characters. I don't even understand how the actors themselves would defend this. I wanted to like Lauren Ridloff as the first deaf superhero in the Marvel Universe so much. And in regards to interactions, she was one of my favorite. When she was there, because an entire hour of this movie goes by without anyone even mentioning her name, let alone showing her. We get 5 seconds of what her human civilian life is like, and that's absolutely it. And outside of a couple sarcastic quips to Keoghan, I don't even know anything about her. How is making your first deaf superhero the least focused on a good thing, when the only thing we know about her is that she's deaf? Because it's not a personality trait. It can definitely impact her personality traits, and it can be explored in great depth, but they don't do that. And as for Brian Tyree Henry having a husband and father in this movie, while it's definitely presented in a mundane way that I wish more movies would, where they don't call attention to it because the people who are going to see this movie are already going to respect and appreciate it. I like that they respect the audience enough in that aspect, but in terms of characterization, I'm just going to flat out say this. The Saberwing dads from DuckTales, who were in 1 episode, had no lines and were in it for a minute tops. They were considerably more impactful because when you look at their daughters' interactions with other people, Violet being constantly polite, independent, refusing to be insecure or envious of other people when they find her weird, and Lena going from being so secretive and self-loathing to being a confident and loyal friend slash sister, you can at least understand how their experiences as gay men have led to their parenting skills for the best. In this movie, I have absolutely no idea what Tyree Henry and his husband have in common with each other, why they fell in love, how they get by with their son, any of these things. I don't want to say this because it clearly wasn't the intention, but it really does feel like it was just for show. And I'm not really sure what else to say about Eternals other than I wish I didn't stutter so much. You guys have no idea how many times I tried to make this video in one take. It's absurd. What I can say is that even though it's not the worst Marvel movie by any stretch of the imagination, or even worst Marvel property in general, it is their most disappointing in the past few years based on the potential that it had to be a much more adult popcorn flick. And if they do get a sequel, they probably will. Here's hoping that they take the criticism for heart. I doubt that they will, given how the current cultural war that we're experiencing right now has reflected on entertainment, but I just wasn't a fan of Eternals, and I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. Thank you as always for watching, guys. If you have seen Eternals, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.